Welcome to Sleepy Night Stories. I am your host, Mr. Vandam. It is a privilege to have you back with me tonight. Before we wade into the dark, heavy, and unforgiving waters of tonight's mystery, I need you to take a moment to prepare yourself. Go ahead and grab your favorite snacks. Pour yourself a tall, fresh, cold drink and find the absolute most comfortable position in your bed. Pull the heavy blanket up to your chin. Let the muscles in your neck relax. Listen closely to the sound of my voice and let yourself drift off to a deep sleep if you can. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, delivered in a story format, then you have found your permanent home, because that is exactly what we do here. Before we head to the scene, if you enjoy our content, please invite the like button for a relaxing day at the local beach. Tell them you are going to build a majestic sandcastle together, but instead, just bury them deep in the wet sand up to their neck, place a plastic bucket firmly over their head, and quietly walk away right as the high tide starts rolling in. Now, let us get into today's story. How do three human beings completely vanish into thin air in the middle of a heavily crowded beach in broad daylight while surrounded by thousands of people? They did not drown. They did not run away. There was no screaming. There was no struggle. 1 minute, they were walking down the street, surrounded by witnesses, and the next minute, it was as if the universe simply opened up and swallowed them whole, leaving absolutely no physical trace behind. What makes this story so utterly terrifying is not just the disappearance itself. It is the chilling realization of what had to have happened right in front of everyone's eyes, hiding in plain sight, completely undetected. To understand the sheer psychological devastation of this case, you have to transport your mind back to a completely different era. We are traveling to the city of Adelaide in South Australia. The date was Wednesday, January 26, 1966. It was Australia Day, a massive national holiday. If you are listening to this right now, and you are in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, you probably remember what the world felt like back then, even if you lived on the other side of the planet. There was an unwritten universal rule of childhood. You left the house in the morning, you rode your bicycle all over the neighborhood, and as long as you were back home for dinner when the street lights flickered on, everything was perfectly fine. Parents did not hover. Doors were routinely left unlocked. Neighbors watched out for each other's children. It was a society built on a foundation of absolute, unquestioned community trust. Living right in the heart of this suburban utopia was the Beaumont family. Jim and Nancy Beaumont were hardworking, deeply loving parents. Jim was a former serviceman who drove a taxi and worked in sales to provide a comfortable life for his family. Nancy was a dedicated homemaker. Their entire world revolved around their three beautiful children. The oldest was Jane, who was 9 years old. Jane was a quiet, highly responsible, and notoriously shy little girl. She took her role as the older sister very seriously. Then there was Arnna, who was 7 years old, a bit more outgoing and playful. And finally, there was little Grant, the baby of the family, who was just 4 years old. The morning of January 26th was blisteringly hot. The summer heat wave was already baking the streets of Adelaide by 8 in the morning. The three children ran into the kitchen and begged their mother to let them go down to Glenelg Beach to cool off. Glenelg Beach was a highly popular, bustling coastal spot, just a short 5-minute bus ride from their home. The children had taken this exact trip by themselves the day before. In 1966, sending a highly responsible 9-year-old to supervise her younger siblings at a local crowded beach for a few hours was not considered dangerous or negligent. It was completely normal. Nancy smiled, helped them gather their towels, and gave Jane a few small coins. The money was strictly budgeted, enough for their bus fare there and back, and just enough left over to buy some small meat pies for lunch. Nancy walked them to the front door, kissed them goodbye, and watched them walk down the sidewalk toward the bus stop. The time was 8:45 in the morning. Nancy gave them one strict rule. They were to catch the noon bus back home, which would arrive at their local stop by 12:15 in the afternoon. Jane promised they would be on that bus. The three children turned the corner, chattering excitedly about the ocean. Nancy Beaumont went back inside her quiet house, entirely unaware that the foundation of her reality was about to violently collapse. The morning passed slowly in the stifling heat. Around noon, Nancy put down her housework and walked the short distance to the local bus stop to meet her children. At exactly 12:15, the heavy diesel engine of the bus rumbled down the street. It pulled up to the curb, the hydraulic doors hissed open, and a crowd of sunburned passengers poured out onto the sidewalk. Nancy stood there, waiting to see Jane's responsible face, leading Arnna and Grant down the steps. But the line of passengers ended, the doors closed, the bus drove away. The children were not there. At this exact moment, Nancy did not panic. If you are a parent, you know this feeling. It is that tiny, sharp pinch of annoyance mixed with mild concern. It was a massive national holiday. The beach was likely packed shoulder to shoulder. She rationalized that Jane had simply lost track of time playing in the waves, and they had missed the first bus. Nancy decided to walk back home, do a few more chores, and return for the next scheduled bus, which was due to arrive at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At 1:45, Nancy walked back to the stop. She stood in the oppressive heat, looking down the road. At 2 o'clock, the second bus arrived. The doors opened. People got off. At once again, Jane, Arnna, and Grant were nowhere to be seen. That tiny pinch of annoyance instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, heavy dread sitting at the bottom of her stomach. The rule was absolute. Be on the noon bus. Jane was incredibly obedient. Jane would never just ignore the rules, and she certainly would not keep her 4-year-old brother out in the blistering sun for this long. Nancy rushed back home. When Jim Beaumont pulled into the driveway after finishing his workday around 3 o'clock, Nancy met him at the door. She was frantic. She told him the children had missed 2 buses and were missing. Jim did not hesitate. He got back into his car and sped toward Glenelg Beach. When he arrived, his heart sank. The beach was an ocean of humanity. There were thousands upon thousands of families, umbrellas and towels, stretching as far as the eye could see. Jim spent the next 2 hours frantically combing the sand. He walked up and down the shoreline, shouting their names over the sound of the crashing waves. He checked the public restrooms. He checked the local shops along the promenade. Every time he saw a little blonde girl or a boy in a bathing suit, his heart would leap, only to be crushed when they turned around and it was a stranger's child. The sun began to dip lower in the sky. The crowds began to pack up and head home. The beach started to empty out, revealing long stretches of bare sand. Jim drove back home, desperately hoping that somehow the children had crossed paths with him and were already sitting safely in the living room. But when he walked through the front door, Nancy was standing there alone, crying. At 5:30 in the evening, Jim and Nancy Beaumont walked into the local Glenelg police station. They officially reported their 3 children missing. The Adelaide police immediately launched a massive search. They assumed that the children were simply lost. A 4-year-old can easily wander off, and the older sisters likely chased after him and got turned around. They broadcasted descriptions over the radio. Police officers patrolled the dark streets. But as the night wore on and the temperature dropped, the terrible reality set in. 3 children do not simply stay lost in a highly populated urban area overnight. Someone would have found them crying on a street corner. The next morning, the police transitioned from a search and rescue operation to a criminal investigation. They began canvassing the public, asking anyone who was at Glenelg Beach on Australia Day to come forward if they had seen the Beaumont children. Dozens of witnesses came forward, and as the detectives started piecing the timeline together, the narrative did not just become terrifying, it became logically impossible. Multiple credible witnesses placed Jane, Arnna, and Grant at the beach that morning. They were seen playing in the shallow water and running through the sprinkler systems on the grassy reserve just off the sand. But several witnesses reported a detail that made Jim and Nancy's blood run completely cold. The witnesses stated that they saw the 3 children actively playing with a young man. He was described as a tall, athletic, heavily sun-tanned man with light blonde hair, likely in his mid-30s. He was wearing a small, dark blue swimsuit. The witnesses noted that the man was casually lying on his stomach on a beach towel. The children were sitting right next to him, happily playing in the sand, laughing and talking with him. When the detectives told Jim and Nancy this, the parents were absolutely paralyzed with confusion. This was the first major break in reality. Jane, the 9-year-old, was cripplingly shy. She was the kind of child who would hide behind her mother's leg when a neighbor said hello. She was deeply suspicious of people she did not know. Jim and Nancy told the police that there was 0% chance that Jane would ever approach a strange man in a swimsuit, let alone sit down on his towel, laugh with him, and allow her younger siblings to play with him. Yet, the witnesses were adamant. The interaction looked entirely peaceful, completely voluntary, and natural. The witnesses assumed the blonde man was their father or an uncle because the children were so incredibly relaxed around him. How does a stranger instantly bypass the natural defensive instincts of a highly cautious 9-year-old girl? The timeline grew even more bizarre. Around 11:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before they were supposed to catch their bus home, the 3 children walked off the beach and went into a local bakery located on the main promenade. The baker knew the children very well. They were regular customers. Jane ordered some meat pies and a few pastries, but when it came time to pay, Jane handed the baker a £1 note. The baker took the money, gave her the change, and the children walked out. When the police relayed this information to Nancy, the mystery escalated into a full-blown nightmare. Nancy knew exactly, down to the penny, how much money she had placed in Jane's hand that morning. It was just a handful of silver coins. She absolutely, definitively did not give her daughter a £1 note. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. The tall, blonde man in the blue swimsuit had given Jane the money. He was buying them lunch. He was providing for them. He was acting like a parent. The final confirmed sighting of the Beaumont children occurred just after noon. A local postman who knew the Beaumont family and recognized the children perfectly saw them walking away from the beach area. They were not walking toward the bus stop. They were walking down a street called Jetty Road, heading in the general direction of their home, but it would have been a very long walk. The postman noticed that the children were not alone. They were walking alongside the tall blonde man. The postman stated that the children looked completely fine. They were not crying. They were not looking for help. In fact, they were holding hands, swinging their arms, and smiling. They even stopped, turned to the postman, smiled cheerfully, and said hello to him as they passed by. The postman smiled back assumed the man was a family friend walking them home, and continued on his route. Jane, Arnna, Grant, and the blonde stranger turned the corner, and they were never seen again. This is the part of the story where the true horror sets in, because the mechanics of this crime shatter everything we understand about human behavior and situational awareness. Think about the sheer logistical nightmare of what this man accomplished. He is in the middle of a beach packed with tens of thousands of people. He is wearing nothing but a small swimsuit. He targets 3 children, not just one. If you have ever tried to manage 3 children, a cautious 9-year-old, an energetic 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old toddler whose little legs get tired very quickly, you know that it is a chaotic, noisy, and highly visible task just to get them from the sand to the car. Now imagine you are a total stranger trying to abduct them. If he grabbed the 4-year-old and tried to run, the 9-year-old would scream her lungs out. If he produced a weapon and threatened them, the sheer terror on their faces would have immediately drawn the attention of the hundreds of parents sitting just a few feet away on the sand. If he forced them into a vehicle on the street, getting 3 children into a car against their will without causing a massive scene in broad daylight is physically impossible. Yet, he walked them away. He walked them through a crowded promenade. He walked them past a postman who knew them. And he did it without generating a single scream, a single tear, or a single cry for help. He erased 3 human beings from the face of the earth with 0 friction. He left 0 physical evidence. Not a discarded towel, not a dropped shoe, not a piece of clothing. How? The twist, the dark, sickening realization that investigators eventually came to was that this was not a crime of opportunity. This was not a spontaneous abduction. The blonde man did not just meet them that morning. In the weeks following the disappearance, Nancy Beaumont remembered a chilling conversation she had with her middle daughter, Arnna, a few weeks prior. Arnna had casually mentioned that Jane had gotten a new boyfriend down at the beach. At the time, Nancy laughed it off, assuming Jane had made friends with a little boy her own age while playing in the sand. But looking back, the context was horrific. The man in the blue swimsuit had likely been watching the Beaumont children for weeks, maybe even months. He had carefully, meticulously groomed them. He had figured out their routine. He knew they came to the beach alone. He slowly built trust with the cautious 9-year-old, presenting himself as a safe, fun authority figure. By the time Australia Day arrived, he was not a stranger to them anymore. He was their secret friend. When he told them they were going to skip the bus and walk somewhere else with him, they trusted him implicitly. They smiled at the postman because they honestly believed they were safe. He weaponized their innocence against them. The disappearance of the Beaumont children fundamentally altered the DNA of an entire nation. It was the absolute end of innocence in Australia. The next day, parents stopped letting their kids walk to school alone. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts. The era of the unlocked door was dead forever. Despite the largest police manhunt in the history of the country, involving psychic mediums, massive rewards, and decades of international investigations, the tall blonde man was never officially identified. The bodies of Jane, Arnna, and Grant were never found. But the true, unyielding nightmare of this story belongs to Jim and Nancy Beaumont. If you are listening to this, and you have children who have grown up and moved out, you know the bittersweet feeling of walking past their empty childhood bedrooms. You remember the noise, the chaos, and the love that used to fill those spaces. Jim and Nancy Beaumont never got to see their children grow up, but they never gave up hope. They believed, with every fiber of their being, that the children were still alive somewhere. They believed that one day the door would open, and Jane, Arnna, and Grant would walk back in. Because of this unwavering, heartbreaking hope, Jim and Nancy Beaumont stayed in that exact same house in Adelaide. They refused to move. If the children managed to escape, they needed to know where their home was. They kept the children's bedrooms exactly the way they were left on the morning of January 26, 1966. The toys remained on the shelves. The clothes remained in the closets. Decades passed. The world changed around them. Jim and Nancy grew old. Their hair turned gray. They became senior citizens, living alone in a silent house, frozen in time. Every single day for the rest of their lives, they woke up, looked out the window, and waited for the noon bus to arrive. And every single day, the doors opened, strangers walked out, and the bus drove away. Nancy Beaumont passed away in a nursing facility in 2019 at the age of 92. Jim Beaumont passed away 4 years later in 2023 at the age of 97. They lived for nearly 60 agonizing years without their babies. They went to their graves never knowing the truth of what happened that day at the beach. The mystery remains entirely unsolved. The blonde man won. Thank you for listening tonight. If you are safe in your bed, take a deep breath. Hold your loved ones close in your heart. Make sure the front door is locked tight, and let the darkness take you. Sleep if you can. Good night.